Welcome to another episode of the Restoration Obscura Field Guide, a podcast that unearths the forgotten corners of history and brings them back into the light. Each episode goes beyond headlines and textbook dates into the places, decisions, and moments that helped shape our world, even if they were left off the official record. These stories are built from archives, old photographs, and the physical traces still etched into the landscape. Here's your host, photographer, historian, and the creator of Restoration Obscura, John Bulmer.
Welcome to episode 5 of the Restoration Obscura Field Guide podcast. This podcast isn't just about archives or memories. It's about what history leaves behind in the land, in the air, and in us. Thanks for joining me. I'm really glad you're here. So let's begin, not with what's missing, but with what now stands in its place. Today, the Empire State Plaza towers over New York's state capital in Albany. It's bold, imposing, and unmistakable. Its sharp geometry slices the sky, casting long shadows over a city older than the country itself. But before we can understand what was lost, we have to understand what was built and what it was meant to say. The view from the center of the plaza is a study in control. Every angle, every material, every towering form speaks a language of power and of a desire to carve permanence into the landscape. 4 identical 23-story agency buildings stretch along the reflecting pools like sentinels in formation, monolithic and austere, their bone-white facades gleaming in the sun. The Erastus Corning Tower rises even higher, 44 stories of marble, glass, and concrete, dwarfing the Capitol and casting a shadow that moves across the city like the hand of a clock. At the southern edge sits the Cultural Education Center, low, wide, and brutalist, its concrete mass slanted forward like a bunker, watching the Capitol with defiant weight. And in the middle of it all, suspended above its pedestal, is the Egg, a strange, windowless shell of a building that seems to float, as if gravity itself had been edited out of the blueprint. By day, the plaza is impressive. By night, it becomes something else entirely. After dark, the marble reflects everything. The plaza throws a halo of artificial light skyward, washing out constellations, visible for miles around. The reflecting pools stretch into blackness, their surfaces so still the buildings mirror themselves with perfect clarity, creating a disorienting illusion of infinite depth. The city's sounds soften, but never fully disappear. The plaza is built atop a platform, and standing on the eastern edge of the complex feels like being on a high cliff, looking out over the south end, past industrial rooftops, and toward the ports of Albany and Rensselaer. From below, it appears almost castle-like, a modern fortification looming above the older city, but from within, it hums. A low vibration rises from beneath the marble, the thrum of ventilation. It's not silence, it's containment. Sound moving through the lungs of something vast and unseen. At night, the plaza turns cinematic, theatrical, lit like a soundstage designed to outlast the story it tells. And yet, for all its grandeur, a melancholy still creeps in. Above it all, the twin red beacons atop the Corning Tower pulse steadily against the sky, firing every 3 seconds, like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. Their rhythm is unchanging, mechanical, patient, a signal not meant for us, but impossible to ignore. Each flash is swallowed by the night sky, a reminder that the city is never fully asleep, that even in the stillness something watches. It's a rhythm you don't notice until you do. And once you do, you begin to see it everywhere, from rooftops in Arbor Hill, from side streets and neighborhoods across the river, always there, a blinking anchor point on the skyline. I've spent hundreds of hours here over the past 2 decades, camera in hand, chasing those moments when the plaza stops being just a place and starts to feel like something else. I've seen protests swell across the marble squares. I've seen weddings soften the hard edges. I've watched concerts ripple across the reflecting pools, turning still water into waves of light and sound. And I've witnessed quiet, uneasy scenes unfold in corners no architect ever meant to shadow. I've walked the plaza through blizzards and heat waves, sometimes pressed in by crowds, sometimes completely alone in the stillness of early morning, when the city feels emptied of everything but a low, steady hum. It's a hum that seems to rise from the marble itself, like the sound of the planet rotating, turning slowly toward sunrise. The Empire State Plaza holds everything, the monumental and the mundane, the beautiful and the broken, suspended in a tension that never quite resolves. It feels permanent and fragile, defiant and hollow, built to last, and already half forgotten. In that unsettled space between what was envisioned and what remains, the traces of the old city still linger, present but overwritten. None of this is accidental. Governor Nelson Rockefeller and architect Wallace Harrison envisioned something transcendent here, a civic space that would remake Albany, and in doing so, define their own legacies, a new Rome for a new era. This wasn't built just for the people of New York. It was designed to awe the world. The plaza would host heads of state. It would showcase modern art on a monumental scale. It would put Albany on the map, not as a footnote of colonial history, but as the forward-facing nerve center of a powerful, progressive state. Their vision wasn't born in a vacuum. Harrison had traveled to Brazil, and the futuristic capital, designed by Oscar Niemeyer and Lucio Costa, left a lasting impression. There, architecture declared national ambition. Sleek lines, elevated platforms, and centralized power made visible in concrete and steel. Rockefeller wanted that here, and so they built it. No expense spared. Over 6 million square feet of marble were imported from Vermont and Italy, chosen for its sheen, its gravity, its suggestion of timelessness. Beneath it all, a network of tunnels and concourses allowed workers, visitors, and dignitaries to move through the complex without setting foot on the old streets of Albany. The clutter and disorder of the past would be cleared away. In its place, symmetry, control, vision. It remains an astonishing feat of scale and ambition, built not only to serve, but to symbolize. Whether it succeeded in doing either is still an open question. Walk its platforms, look down its corridors, and something feels off. A strangeness lingers in the geometry, a tension in the space. The Empire State Plaza doesn't flow with the city. The plaza obliterated it. Dropped into Albany like a monument from another planet, it severed the city's original street grid without apology. Where the city once grew organically, following the curves of the river, the rise of the hills, the rhythms of neighborhoods, the plaza imposed a rigid, unyielding geometry. Old streets like Hudson Avenue, Hamilton, and Grand were cut off mid-block. Footpaths that once connected residents to corner stores, schools, churches, and one another were erased, replaced with wide plazas that offered no shade, no cover, no reason to pause. And in their absence, something unexpected emerged. Desire paths, the informal trails where people walked anyway. They traced shortcuts to bus stops, cross-plaza diagonals, meandering lines from garages to offices, routes that made sense to feet, not to blueprints. These weren't part of the plan, but they appeared anyway, worn by repetition, marked by need. They were the city pushing back, the human scale reasserting itself, each one a reminder that no matter how carefully architecture imposes order, people find their own way. The elements that made urban life feel legible, corner shops, stoops, conversations with neighbors, were swept aside. In their place, white marble plains and institutional silence. The plaza didn't just divide Albany physically, it became a psychological border. What had once been a seamless movement from the capital down toward the river, through the South End and beyond, was fractured. Not by distance, but by intent. And it wasn't just streets that were severed. It was the relationships they carried, the informal economy of corner stores, the kinship of stoops and staircases, the quiet rituals that bound a city together. Albany didn't grow around the plaza. It grew around the absence the plaza left behind. Even now, if you walk its edges, you can still feel it. The sudden interruption, stillness that is not quite peace, the sense that something was torn out and replaced with something colder, heavier, and farther from human hands. The plaza wasn't simply built over Albany's heart, it pressed it down layer by layer beneath stone, concrete, and glass. But that heartbeat, It's still there. You just have to know how to listen. It's tempting to imagine that the destruction of those 98 acres in downtown Albany came about slowly through years of careful planning and community input. But that's not the story. The decision to erase these neighborhoods was made at the highest levels of state government, swiftly, privately, and with little interest in what the people who lived there might want. It was a collision between political ambition and human reality, and the ambitions won. In 1959, during a visit by Princess Beatrix of the Netherlands, Governor Nelson Rockefeller was embarrassed by the sight of Albany's aging, crumbling downtown. The state capitol stood proud, but beyond its steps, the streets gave way to sagging row houses, vacant lots, and a neighborhood bearing the scars of post-war economic shifts. Rockefeller envisioned something different, something grand enough to match the power of New York State, something modern enough to project authority into the new century. Shortly after the royal visit, he reportedly sketched the basic outlines of what would become the Empire State Plaza on the back of an envelope. That vision would evolve into the largest state office complex of its kind in the country. He wanted marble, he wanted towers, he wanted a government city that would rival the great capitals of the world. And to create it, an entire piece of Albany would have to vanish. Through a legal maneuver known as the County Lease Program, Rockefeller and Albany's powerful but cautious mayor, Erastus Corning II, found a way to finance the project without requiring voter approval. Albany County would issue bonds, bypassing the state's constitutional debt limits, and the state would lease the plaza back from them. This arrangement kept the debt off official books, but handed immense power to the governor's office. Thousands of families living between State Street and Morton Avenue, between Eagle Street and Swan, were not consulted. They were coldly informed. Condemnation notices arrived by mail, tucked into brown envelopes bearing the state seal. Some arrived suddenly. Others came after months of rumor and uncertainty that kept families in anxious limbo. The letters told them plainly their homes were no longer theirs. The land they lived on, the land their parents and grandparents had fought to own, was being taken by the state under the power of eminent domain. Compensation would be offered, but they were expected to leave. Oral histories gathered by researchers from the 98 Acres in Albany project reveal the true human cost. Some families tried to fight the condemnation, hiring lawyers they couldn't afford, only to discover that the state's decisions were final and the courts offered no refuge. Many families were paid sums well below the market value of their homes. Fair market as determined by state assessors who saw the neighborhood not as a living place, but as blight to be cleared. There was no accounting for sentimental value, for generational history, for the years of labor poured into maintaining a home on a modest salary. Even those who tried to stay found themselves surrounded by demolition crews, dust, and wrecking balls. Entire blocks were stripped bare. Residents who hadn't yet left were forced to endure the disintegration of their streets around them, the rumble of machines tearing apart the familiar world outside their windows. Photographs from the time show houses standing isolated amid seas of rubble, like battered ships in a field of broken stone, shop fronts with broken windows, signs still swinging in the wind, advertising goods that would never be sold. For many, the emotional pain was as physical as any wound. It wasn't just the loss of property, it was the loss of place, of proximity to neighbors, of the networks of family and community that held people together. It was the loss of familiarity, of the geography of memory. It wasn't just the loss of houses, it was the loss of a way of life. And once it was gone, there was no getting it back. And through it all, the plaza continued to rise, a towering monument built atop the footprints of the displaced. The sacrifice was made in the name of progress. But for those who lived through it, progress came at the cost of everything that made a neighborhood a home. Once the letters were delivered, once the courtrooms and county offices had cleared the way, the real work of transformation or destruction began. The demolition crews wasted no time. They moved with the precision and relentlessness of an occupying force, methodical and unstoppable. Entire blocks disappeared almost overnight. At the height of the clearance, 2 to 3 buildings fell every day, torn apart by iron jaws and swinging wrecking balls, reduced to jagged piles of brick, splintered wood, and twisted piping. The skyline that was once a patchwork of steeples, tin rooftops, fire escapes, and neon storefront signs flattened into a barren moonscape, raw and unrecognizable. Street after street stripped to its bones, reduced to rubble fields broken only by a few stubborn lampposts and fire hydrants. Sidewalks ended abruptly, crumbling into open lots where row houses had stood for generations. Brick foundations jutted from the earth like broken teeth. Streets that had carried the weight of daily life, market days, weddings, funerals, 4th of July parades, now simply dissolved into dust and wire fencing. The sounds of the neighborhood changed too. Gone were the daily symphonies of human life, the call of merchants, the clatter of trolley bells along South Pearl Street, the thwack of stickball bats in the alleys. In their place came the mechanical roar of diesel engines, the grind of bulldozers, the beat of jackhammers chipping away at stone and memory. The wrecking balls swung in heavy arcs, hammering through walls that had once echoed with laughter, prayer, and argument. The very air changed. It thickened with grit and dust, scratching the lungs and settling into clothes and curtains. The metallic tang of machinery mixed with the dry smell of crumbling mortar, creating a new kind of atmosphere, one that made it impossible to forget what was happening, even for a moment. Fine dust coated everything. It drifted into the few houses still occupied at the margins of the demolition zone, sifted down into open window panes, and settled onto dashboards of parked cars. It blurred the edges of the city, turning familiar corners into a strange, unsteady landscape. For those who remained, who hadn't yet found a new place to go, or who had nowhere else to turn, the days became a kind of living wake. Each morning they woke to new absences. The butcher's shop where you bought Sunday dinner, gone. The stoop where you sat as a child, gone. The corner where your father and his friends gathered after work to talk politics and baseball, gone. In oral histories recorded decades later by the 98 Acres in Albany project, many former residents described the experience as surreal, as if the ground itself were being pulled out from under them. The streets they had known by muscle memory now ended in mounds of debris. The rhythm of daily life became a maze of dead ends, half-demolished sidewalks, and strange, barren fields. Every day, something else was missing. And still, the demolition continued. The destruction was swift, but the construction rose even faster. As soon as one block was cleared, foundation crews moved in behind the bulldozers. They dug deep, pouring concrete into trenches wide enough to swallow entire streets. The plaza's weight demanded it, not just structurally, but symbolically. The past wouldn't just be erased, it would be buried. Beneath the growing complex, workers carved a hidden city, miles of underground concourses, loading docks, and service tunnels. A world designed to make the new government city self-sufficient and insulated. Visitors to the plaza would never need to set foot on the streets it had replaced. They would move instead through an orderly, climate-controlled labyrinth beneath the marble. Above ground, the skeletons of steel and concrete began to rise. They blocked out the skyline that had once belonged to the people, the steeples, the row houses, the market awnings, and replaced it with faceless walls of marble and glass. You could watch the birth of a new city atop the grave of the old one, a city of authority, heavy enough to press the past deeper into the earth with every floor poured and facade polished. There were no ceremonies to mourn what had been lost, no memorials to the neighborhoods cleared away, only the hum of construction, endless, relentless, and the slow spreading shadow of the new plaza over what remained. By the time the agency buildings reached their full height, by the time the marble plazas were laid and the reflecting pools filled, few traces of the old survived. What had once been generations of memory and community had been paved over with ambition. The work of forgetting had been poured in concrete, polished in stone, and made to shine. The Empire State Plaza wasn't the only scar Albany carried into the modern era. Even as the marble towers rose in the heart of the city, another force was carving its way along Albany's eastern edge, Interstate 787. In the name of efficiency and progress, 787 was laid down as a barrier between Albany and its river, a roaring, elevated highway that severed the historic relationship between the city and the Hudson River. A relationship that had shaped Albany's identity for more than 3 centuries. Before the highway, the river was a natural extension of the city's life. Markets spilled toward the docks. Warehouses and shipping yards buzzed with work. Families strolled along the wharves. Neighborhoods like the South End and Arbor Hill reached naturally toward the water's edge. With the construction of 787, that rhythm was broken. Concrete pylons rose where riverfront streets once led. Access to the Hudson became a maze of underpasses, ramps, and barriers. The river, once a source of connection and commerce, became something glimpsed briefly between girders at 60 miles per hour. Albany became a city cut off from itself. The Empire State Plaza severed its heart. Interstate 787 severed its lungs. The old patterns of daily life began to unravel. Walking from stoop to storefront, from neighborhood to riverbank no longer made sense. The city became a series of islands, the plaza in one direction, downtown commerce in another, the waterfront somewhere else entirely. Neighborhoods were pushed to the margins, left to adapt as best they could to a landscape no longer built for them. In the mid-20th century, this was called urban renewal. It was sold as progress, clean, efficient, modern. But what was lost in the process was harder to measure. It was not just buildings or blocks or boulevards. It was the small daily interactions that built a city's soul. The casual crossing of paths at the corner grocer, the smell of fresh bread from a bakery on Hamilton Street, the sound of a river steamer's horn mixing with children playing stickball, the invisible network of neighbors who knew each other's names, their stories. When progress came to Albany, it arrived with a heavy hand and a grand vision, and it mistook permanence for life. It mistook authority for community. It mistook ambition for belonging. The result was a city that gleams under the sun and the spotlights, but sometimes walking its streets, you can still feel the missing pieces. The long blank walls where there should be doorways, the empty spaces where corners once echoed with life, the river, still beautiful, but a little farther away than it ought to be, as if it belongs to someone else now. Albany, in its bones, remembers. It remembers what it means to be stitched together and what it feels like to be pulled apart. Lost neighborhoods, lost streets, lost rhythms. The Empire State Plaza and Interstate 787 were built to project a future, but they buried the past. History is not always buried by accident. Sometimes it is paved over on purpose, rewritten in marble, reimagined in concrete. But memory is a stubborn thing. It lingers in the uneven slope of a sidewalk. It survives in the stories passed from parents to children, stories of streets that no longer exist. Memory reasserts itself, even in strange places. There are corners of the plaza where kids ride scooters. They trace new paths over old ones. There are food trucks parked along the concourse. They play music that echoes through the hard spaces. Some memories live in the senses, others live in the street grid. Broken and incomplete, a dead-end sidewalk that once connected to Grand Street, a retaining wall that used to hold back a garden, the mismatched patchwork where brick gives way to marble. These are the ghost joints of the city's old frame, not yet erased, just overwritten. The Empire State Plaza was built to dominate the skyline. Interstate 787 was built to speed up the future, but speed and size do not always build meaning. Sometimes they erase it. And in that contrast between the human and the monumental, between past and present, Albany remains. Not as it was, not entirely as it was imagined, but still here, still alive. Albany is a city that remembers in layers, the fragments of a street grid that no longer quite fits, the quiet resistance of an old church that sits just outside the blast radius, the generational memory passed down in kitchens and living rooms, even if the buildings themselves are long gone. The true story of a city is not found in its grand designs. It is found in its scars, in its stubbornness, in its memory. You can still hear it. Albany remembering itself. In the curve of a street that bends around nothing except a memory. In the names that still reflect places on a map long out of date, even when everything else was torn down. And thanks to the efforts of many dedicated volunteers and researchers, there is more now to remember than ever. This isn't nostalgia, it's presence. A city shaped by what it survived. If you know how to look, you'll find it. A city holding on, not vanished, just unfinished. Epilogue to episode 5. That's what this is, an epilogue. While researching this story and writing this episode, I was struck by the symmetry. The families forced to leave their homes for the Empire State Plaza weren't so different from the families I've written about before. Those displaced by the rising waters of the Tom Hannock, the Ashokan, and the Sacandaga reservoirs. Different towns, different decades, same outcome. A place erased, a community scattered, a memory left to fade unless someone chooses to hold on. These stories matter. They remind us who gets to decide what's worth preserving and what's allowed to disappear in the name of progress. Restoration Obscura exists to trace those decisions, to listen for what lingers after the machinery leaves, to find meaning in what was paved over, flooded out, or quietly forgotten. Because history doesn't just live in monuments, it lives in the spaces we've forgotten to grieve. And remembering fully honestly, is the first step toward restoring what we still can. You can find my previous work on the reservoirs of upstate New York and the stories of those who were displaced by them on restorationobscura.com. If you've been enjoying the Restoration Obscura Field Guide, our deep dives into forgotten history, lost infrastructure, and the echoes of the past, there's a way to be part of the story behind the scenes. We're currently welcoming select sponsorship partners for upcoming episodes and articles. Whether you're an independent brand, museum, publisher, archive, or just someone who believes in the power of storytelling, this is your chance to reach an engaged, history-loving audience across Substack, Facebook, Instagram, and all major streaming platforms. If your mission aligns with ours, preserving the past, exploring the overlooked, or just digging deeper than the headlines, we'd love to connect. For sponsor opportunities and media inquiries, contact restorationobscura@gmail.com. Let's bring more forgotten stories to light together. This podcast is copyright 2025 John Bulmer Media and Restoration Obscura. All rights reserved. No reuse, rebroadcast, or repurposing of any content is permitted without express written permission. The Restoration Obscura Field Guide podcast is available on all major streaming platforms. If you enjoyed what you heard, please like and subscribe. It truly helps us reach more listeners. Thanks for listening. I'm John Bulmer, and remember, every photo has a story, and every story connects us. Until next time, take care.
This was a Restoration Obscura broadcast. Archive reference terminated. Operation complete. Restoration Obscura signing off.